Alright, so we're going to be waxing up number 5. The way I like to do it, you don't have to do it, but I'm going to show you some tips and tricks real fast on what you should be looking for when you're building up your tooth, as well as when you're double checking your tooth to make sure everything's correct. This is just another one of your students who waxed this up. We're just going to ignore that for a second and focus here. So the first thing I do is interproximals, and what I keep seeing everybody mess up on is when you're looking at your height of your slope here, notice how the slope corner meets the slope corner of the canine. Everybody keeps going too low there, so you guys got to keep careful of that. Same thing on this, the premolar matches the premolar. Alright, and your cusp, or your interproximal contacts are going to be about 1 millimeter or so below that. So don't build up this contact, your mesial contact, without making sure you're high up enough on the tooth. A lot of people keep making that mistake. Alright, so after I make my interproximals, the next thing I do is establish my buccal cusp tip and the correct locations, both in height. The way I check height is quite simple. You take your probe, your flat end, you come in, and these three are going to be roughly the same height. So if you make these the same height, you'll be fine. So on this side, this isn't my tooth, but we're about the same height, so he's good there. So the next thing I do is check mesiodistally if we're in the right location. And the way you do that is two ways. One, you can choose to measure the cusp tip from this cusp tip to the next cusp tip. It comes out to be right about there. What is that? 4, 5, 6, about 7. Alright, so we'll come here from the cusp tip of the second premolar and we'll measure 7. Alright, so we're kind of in the ballpark here. The other thing you can do is just close your mouth and look at how distal this contact or this slope is because of this contact or cusp tip height. Cusp tip is distal. Your longer slope is your mesial, not your distal. Your distal is shorter. So let's look at this side. We're a little mesial in this case, so you want to move it distal, right? Maybe like 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter, he'll be in the ballpark. So now we've established height, we've established mesiodistal. Let's get facial lingual, or buccal lingual in this case. So the way I do that is looking at the cusp tips of your 2 premolars and your canine. They're actually all going to line up. This one's not so perfect because the dentiform's kind of off, but it'll get you in the ballpark here. So 2 ways. You can either look at it from the top, or with your eye, look at it from this point of angle, so I can get this focus in, and kind of match the canine cusp tip with the second premolar cusp tip, and you'll see where your cusp tip in the middle is supposed to line up. So when we do that here, this not only shows you your height, but it shows you your width. So notice here, I'd say he's a little buccal, but he's overall in the ballpark here. But that cusp tip is too narrow. You can build it up more by adding some wax right here, right? The other thing that you can look from this view, and don't worry about that just yet, is your height of contour on your facial, as well as the angulation of the slope from that height of contour to your cusp tip. So this slope is going to match this slope. Let's look what happened here. We have this slope to this slope. I think you're okay. You could carve it a bit more, but just to emphasize that slope. Alright, so what I like to do before I even do that buccal surface, so I found my interproximals, I found my buccal cusp tip location. Now I'm going to build out these slopes on the buccal. Oh boy. Alright, so easy way to do this, sorry for the camera shake, is use your perio probe and measure and look. It's kind of hard to see in the camera where these slopes go to. So one slope is going right about there. So I'm gonna take a pencil, and it's going right about there. The other slope is always going to point, I already know this, it's going to point to the interproximal contact of your canine and your lateral. So let's look where this goes. Pretty much there. So let's look at these slopes here. We have one, I think it's two buccal, so we can turn that in more, right? And then the other one is 2 facial. We can turn that one in more as well. And if you've already built up your slopes, there's 2 ways you can fix this. One way is to just reheat your PKT instruments and remake your hot dog pointing in the correct location. So if you notice, when you're looking at this tooth, what people often do when they're doing these build-ups is they'll go from the cusp tip directly to the interproximal. That's incorrect. If you look here, you're going from the cusp tip, everything's backwards here, from the cusp tip, to about 1/2 millimeter or so from your actual contact. So you're not aiming for your contact, and what that's going to do is help create this bulge here that you see. Alright, and same thing on this side. Don't aim for your contact. What you're aiming for is those guides I showed you earlier, that interproximal contact, and right about here. If you forget your guides, just remeasure. You have the answer key across from you. Just use that. Alright, so what I like to do after that, if you want to continue on with the buccal surface, you can go ahead and do that. If you don't want to do that, find your lingual cusp. For me, because it costs more points, I would say from there I stop that, and I just go ahead and start my lingual cusp location, and then from there we'll start drawing in our line angles and stuff. So we already have our cusp tip and the correct location for the buccal. We've drawn our slopes from the buccal. We have our interproximals already. That was the first thing we did, and now we're going to get our lingual. For our lingual, the easiest thing to do, one, the squish method, which you guys have been shown, I hope so. If not, it's okay, we can show it to you later. The other thing is just building up and incrementally with just dot after dot. And the reason why you want to do that for this case, if you choose to do that, is a lot of times what people don't see is that you can't really decipher where exactly you're hitting when you get your squish, so you carve out incorrectly, so you land on the slope. So let me just pause and take a look at this one. Alright, so with this lingual contact, you guys, a lot of times you see how this is closing. In this case, it's not closing incorrectly because of his wax up, it's just his dentiform. See how it's sliding back? But what can cause this, be sure that you're not just squishing your contact paper, because you have to make sure if you have a slide that it's not caused by your wax up. In this case, if it was his wax, I would say it was the mesial of his lingual cusp tip that's contacting the slope of the buccal cusp first, the lingual slope of the buccal cusp, and then slapping down. So that's not the case here. He's in the ballpark again. So the contact that you want to do, that you want to aim for, is going to be the slope of the premolar, or the marginal ridge of the premolar, not in the pit, not off of it, not onto a slope, and not onto the lingual. You want to be, here's your central groove line, you want your contact point to be right there. So make sure you're doing that when you build up your lingual. Alright, so going back to the buccal now, because I forgot to show you guys, if you've already built up your buccal slopes and you've realized they're incorrect, pointing the wrong location, I was saying you can either add with the PKT 1 or 2. I like the smaller end of the larger PKT. So just aim from that cusp tip straight to your target. Don't go to the interproximal contact, alright? The other thing you can do is if you have excess bulk, you can just carve to where your carver comes in. See if I can angle this right. Your carver comes in, point it towards your contact, not your interproximal contact, but where you're aiming for. So I'm aiming for about here, right here. So I'll come in and I'll just start carving, bottom up, all right? And what that's gonna do for you is emphasize your V shape that you see on your buccal as opposed to being round. A lot of people build up round. So look at this other tooth, this other premolar. See how it's a V? It's more of a V. Yeah, so do that. So the next thing I would do, either fill in the buccal after you do your contoured line angles, or just find your other most important thing point-wise is the MI contact that's by the kidney bean, or that mesial portion of your tooth. So the MI contact, when you're making it, make sure that the contact that lands on your wax is created by the tip of the cusp tip. A lot of people make a mistake by having it land here or land here, and unless you really look at it, in his case, he's actually landing on the cusp tip, you won't see that happen unless you close your mouth, use your light, and actually look. Well, I can't use a light for this video, but actually look at where your tooth is going. Here we go. Alright, and make sure it's your cusp tip that's creating that contact, not on the slope. So next, I would go ahead and do the buccal for me. What I like to do, I don't really focus so much on spending my time trying to build up the perfect contour from this view. I just go ahead and I just take a PKT, I add some wax, I go at it, I go make sure I add just enough bulk so my height of contour will be there after I carve it down. And what I'm aiming for is that appropriately located buccal cusp tip, okay? So from the center of the root, create your height of contour a bit, and then go all the way to your cusp tip, all right, where it should be. It's a little bit more distal where it should be. So then I'll go ahead and I'll create my line angles from the height of contour up to the interproximal. Now, if you look at your tooth, it's not very round. It's actually more V-like towards this gingiva. So let me get this perio probe. It's more of a V down here, right? The bottom 3 millimeters, I'd say. It's not really round. The same thing goes for the lingual view, you know? It's not very round. A lot of people like to build up too much here. It's too much bulk. It's still pretty straight here and right about here. So make sure you do that in your wax up. Let's see how he did here. It's not too bad. See, it's a little bulky. Not there. I can't. Alright, right there. It's kind of hard with the camera, guys. Sorry. But right there. So if you're looking at it from the lingual, notice how you can see that kidney bean without the buildup blocking the view of the kidney bean right here. This is what I mean by kidney bean. Alright, so let's go back out to the buccal. As I was saying, so I build it up, I fill it in, and then from the same view that we used to look at our cusp tip location, which was this one, I go ahead and I say, okay, I'm going to carve. And now what I stated earlier with the cusp tip location, a lot of you guys probably noticed this second premolar is a little taller and a little bit more buccal than the others. If you want to build it like that, I don't recall what the professors want, but you can build it like that. Go for it. That's in the ballpark either way. You're not going to get killed for that, so don't worry. Just make sure your slope is correct and your height of contour is correct. Slope being this, height of contour being this. Alright, so in his case, let's see how we did here. So we have in the ballpark, but let's pretend this isn't here because we just added a whole bunch of wax, right? So now what I want you to do is with your PKT4, alright, I use this, and with this view in mind, hold your cutting instrument at the same slope that you want to mimic, replicate, right? And get in the correct location, and you'll just have a bunch of bulk here, right? So you'll just start carving, carve it off, carve it off, carve it off, until you're back down to where you want to be. Look back over, check for your cervical height of contour, see if it's okay. If it's not, carve it down. And what you want to do also with the carver is ride the root. You see how you can ride the root here? Ride the root here and get that height of contour out like this, alright? Yeah. And what I like to do after that is coming back up to the top with your slopes already in the appropriate location. So ignore this, right? I'll come and I'll carve out the definition of the buccal. So I will carve it out. When you do this, be careful not to compromise the bulge of the tooth structure that you built up all that time that you built trying to establish this bulge right here. Don't get rid of it, okay? You want that there, so you're not carving into your interproximal contact. So in this case, like, I can cut here. Whoop. I can cut here, fixing the location of this. So I'm going to pause the video and do that real fast. Alright, so notice now how the slope is no longer pointing facial, it's pointing more lingual towards this contact. And what you can do now, anytime you carve, you always want to check your embrasures. Notice how my mesial embrasure is too sharp. So if I can navigate through the camera, I just cold burnish this corner. Alright, so that's better. Now, I do the same exact thing on the distal. And remember, we're pointing on the distal to right about here. If you remember, just measure on the other side. Okay? So I'll go ahead and, I think he's okay here. What I'm just going to do is carve for the sake of adding the anatomy to the buccal as opposed to relocating the slope of the buccal cusp. Because if you look at the anatomy here, it used to be round, but we're kind of making our way into more of a V shape. So I'm going to do that other side now. Same thing, just carve that same motion I showed you. The PKT4, which I lost it. Nope, it's here. So I'm coming, and I'm going to be aiming right about here. So I'll hold it in the same angle. Alright, so I did that here. And now the next step I would do is I'd focus on the facial, and I'd really round it out in the sense of those line angles. So I think it's still pretty fat on the distal. The mesial not so much because I already hit it once, but I'm going to come in with the tooth off like you guys are doing in number 8 and carve with the PKT4 around the corners. Around the corners here, trying to emphasize your line angles. Okay, so I went ahead and opened up those embrasures a bit more to really make your tooth have more line angles on the facial, because this is what you're trying to replicate, right here. So, not perfect, but it's getting there. So now if you're still following along, we've already set up the interproximal contacts first, the buccal cusp tip, the lingual cusp tip if you like, or just go ahead and do those buccal cusp slopes alongside with the facial. Now we're done with the buccal. Now let's move to the lingual. The first thing I like to do is strengthen up the cusp tip by building up your height of contour build up your height of contour on the lingual. It's supposed to be in the middle third, so let me set this down. From this view, the height of contour for your tooth is going to be pretty much where that line is that the tooth has, right? The middle third. So compare that with the opposite side, and you're going to find that usually you're too low and bulky. In his case, he's not super far off, but what I like to do is notice that it's like 2 cuts. If you build bulky and then decide to cut, it's the same thing as a buccal, but you're going to come in and you're going to cut pretty straight for the first cut, and then your second cut is going to be kind of at a tilt, right? And you don't want to overcut to where you reduce your contact point. Obviously you don't want to lose that, so be careful when you do that. Once that's established, I have enough support now that I can build off, and I actually should have done this at the same time I built my lingual cusp tip contact, unless you support it a different way, then support it a different way. So what I do now is just go ahead and from your lingual cusp tip to your contact points interproximally, you want to guide this line angle here. So the same mistake that people keep making on the buccal, they keep making on the lingual as well. When you're doing this, don't go straight to your contact point. It's going to be open. Don't go straight to your contact point here. It's going to be open. Alright? So what I want you to notice on this tooth is that from the contact point, it comes out, the marginal ridge comes out open, comes out straight to really close that embrasure up by about 1 millimeter or 2 before it starts to turn. So do that on your wax up. Come out 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters, and then start your turn. So in his case, he did it okay. It's not horrible, but there's always room for improvement, no matter whose wax up you're looking at. That's the problem with waxing. You just gotta get it to the point where you're confident in your product, I guess. So go ahead. What I like to do, I'll carry it from here so I'll take the PKT again, the smaller end of it. This is the PKT 1. Heat it up, add the wax, not so hot that you're going to melt the wax, and then go down and around and really create the roundness that you want to have here, and then carry it forward a bit, matching both your marginal ridge heights, as well as what I like to do and what I like to see is this height matches this height here. So you don't want to be really high, you don't want to be really low. Let me show you here. Yeah, you don't want to be really high or really low. So just kind of match it. He did a okay job here. Look at this side. Now for this side, the kidney bean, I always do after I establish my MI. And we've already established the MI at this point. If we haven't, we can do it now. However, keep in mind, if you haven't done your MI yet, and you've done your pretty much everything else, make sure that when you're closing your mouth, that there's not wax preventing you from completely closing your mouth. And what I mean by that is if you build this section of the tooth high, be careful, because it's going to throw everything else off, because the mouth won't close as far down as it should be, so everything's going to be really big. And that's another thing I keep saying too, just in general, everything's really big. So make sure you're narrow at the base, more wide at the top. And there's 2 kinds of approaches I take for embrasures to make sure of that. One's from the top, where you're pretty much looking at the embrasures that you're used to, you know? And the other is, as you move, look at that embrasure open up. You see? It doesn't stay that closed. So make sure you try and mimic that. Look how it's almost a straight line here. Straight line up. Notice how it's a straight line here, and then it comes out. So the curve on your tooth begins where this rough line is. Everything below, for the most part, you can get away by carving away straight. So let's look at here. The other thing I keep seeing as well, guys, and on that note, people keep adding too much bulk here. They add too much bulk here, and that's what throws everything off. It's not so bad here, but make sure your bulk is not too high, because what that's going to do is act as your height of contour when you're viewing it from the lingual. So make sure you shave that down back here. Alright, back here. And then, like I was saying, got distracted. The kidney bean, you want to do after you get your MI. So find your MI. I do the squishy method. That way you're ensured that your wax up's never going to crack on you. Same thing on the lingual. I like doing the squishy method. But build your kidney bean up. And then once you're done with that, notice how your kidney bean ends where your central groove is. So even if you don't do a kidney bean, even if you do a straight line, you can carve in your kidney bean here, just based off of where the central groove is. See that? Alright. And I build my kidney bean first, and then from there, again, from here, the cusp tip to the bottom, you don't want to go straight. You want to make it round. He did a good job here. Make it round. Alright? So, when you do that, make sure that you're not too tall and you're not too short again, and that you're not closing this embrasure here. Alright? I haven't judged his embrasure too much here, but I'd say towards the kidney he's fine, and he's a bit open towards the body, towards that second portion. You see it? But towards the lower half of his tooth, it's not too bad. He's getting there. So, anywho, guys, for the occlusal surface now, after we finish that, what I like to do is just fill in from that point and carve around. If you like to carve around the root, like you did on number 8, go ahead and carve around the root. You shouldn't have any wax hanging off of your wax up onto your root, okay? And then from there, because I only have 2 minutes of memory left, if that, I'm going to just hit up the occlusal surface. So what I like to do, if you've already have your cusp tip locations correct, drag out with the same PKT1, the smaller end. You want to, dip it in wax, drive a line, a hot dog, from the cusp tip. Anytime you're starting from the cusp tip, don't actually hit the top of the cusp tip. You're going to melt it and it's going to be incorrect. So start from the side. So in this case, I'm starting from the side. I'm coming down. Same thing on the buccal. From the side, I'm coming down, meeting in the middle at the central groove. And you know you're correct when you're holding it from this view and you have your height here match your height here, and your height here match your height here. So in his case, here and here, I think he's a little lacking. He can build up a bit more. Once you do that, go ahead. I'm going to speed it up here because I'm running out. Go ahead, fill it in. Don't be afraid to overfill, because you can always come back in with your discoid cleoid, the smaller one, and just come in and carve this out. Your pits are going to be, your distal pit is 4 millimeters from this pit. Make sure it's the same depth. Feel it out if you think it's wrong. And then this pit to this pit is 3 millimeters. But if you have your contact right, then you know your pit's right next door. No problem there. And then finish up with the discoid cleoid. Get your MI. Do your lateral excursive contact movements. You shouldn't have any contact on the wax with the tooth. So guide it canine to canine. You know what I'm talking about? And you can either do that and carve off the wax that way, or use your MI and get anything that's not your 2 contact points. So I'm out of memory now, but if you guys have any other questions, I can make another video, but this is the stuff that I keep seeing wrong. So remember, interproximals and MI and those line angles really throw people off every time. Alright guys? Good luck, work hard.